Imagine for a moment that the future of our civilization is sitting right in front of us, not in grand halls of power, not in the hands of politicians or corporations, but in the small, watchful eyes of children who are quietly learning what it means to live, to think, and to act. What we choose to teach them, what we choose to withhold from them, and how we choose to shape them will determine whether the next century is one of strength and wisdom, or one of confusion and collapse. Children are individuals, not vessels for ideology. That's the first principle we must recognize if we are to take education and development seriously. Too often, we think of children as miniature adults, or worse, as blank slates upon which we can write our beliefs, frustrations, or political agendas. But that is a profound mistake. A child is a unique being, a person whose life unfolds in unpredictable ways, whose temperament, aptitudes, and interests cannot simply be engineered into conformity with our desires. They are not tools to extend our world, view into the future. They are lives that deserve to flourish on their own terms. To treat them otherwise is to deny their humanity, to reduce them to pawns in a game much larger than they can even comprehend. It is easy to forget that children come into the world fragile, dependent, and open to influence. Their minds are malleable, their characters unformed. This openness is both a gift and a danger. It means they can absorb wisdom, discipline, and courage, but it also means they can be warped by ideology, indoctrination, or the unresolved conflicts of the adults who shape them. When a parent insists that a child must carry the weight of their political convictions, or when an educator treats the classroom as a training ground for ideological soldiers, what is lost is the individual child. The child disappears under the burden of expectation, molded not into who they might authentically become, but into a caricature of someone else's dream. What makes this so destructive is that ideology, by definition, is a narrowing of perspective. It takes the infinite complexity of life and squeezes it into rigid categories. If a child is taught to see themselves primarily through one ideological lens, whether of class, race, gender, or politics, then their identity becomes hostage to that singular interpretation. They stop being a developing human being and start being a symbol. Symbols are useful in political arguments, but they are terrible containers for human potential. The uniqueness of a child cannot be reduced to a slogan. To do so is to rob them of the richness of possibility, of the chance to discover their talents, their responsibilities, and their meaning in life. Children deserve something far better than this. They deserve to be seen as persons who carry within them the same spark of consciousness, the same sacred capacity for thought and growth that we recognize in ourselves. Each child has the potential to surprise us, to exceed the limits we place upon them, to carve a path that neither their parents nor their teachers could have foreseen. If we instead see them as mere receptacles for our battles, we strangle that potential before it even has a chance to breathe. The moral task of adults is not to make children into extensions of themselves, but to guide them carefully as they navigate the difficult terrain of existence, equipping them with tools rather than chains, with freedom rather than dogma, with dignity rather than propaganda. Education's true purpose is the pursuit of truth, not indoctrination. That distinction is critical because it shapes not only the structure of our schools, but the very future of the societies in which those schools exist. When we talk about education, we are talking about something far more profound than the mere transfer of information. Education is the disciplined effort to introduce the next generation to the accumulated wisdom of humanity, to the discoveries and ideas that allow us to make sense of the world. It is the attempt to provide young minds with maps of reality, imperfect, yes, but invaluable nonetheless, so that they can orient themselves and act effectively in the face of the unknown. The tragedy is that this noble pursuit is so easily corrupted. Indoctrination masquerades as education when teachers or institutions decide that their role is not to open minds, but to close them around a prepackaged set of ideas. Instead of teaching students how to think, indoctrination teaches them what to think. Instead of exposing them to the great debates of history, it hands them conclusions and demands loyalty. It provides the comfort of certainty without the struggle of inquiry, and in doing so, it undermines the very process that gives education its transformative power. Children trained in such a system do not emerge as capable, independent thinkers. They emerge as parrots, echoing the slogans and dogmas of their instructors. The pursuit of truth, by contrast, is demanding. It requires humility, because the truth is rarely simple and often uncomfortable. It requires courage, because to confront the truth is to admit that one's cherished beliefs may be incomplete or even wrong. And it requires discipline, because discovering truth involves effort, study, debate, and reflection. A proper education does not shield students from this struggle. It immerses them in it. It asks them to grapple with history's contradictions, to wrestle with the ambiguities of literature, to face the rigor of mathematics and science, and to confront the ethical dilemmas that have troubled humanity for millennia. A child educated in pursuit of truth emerges not with ready-made answers, but with the capacity to seek answers honestly. Such a child is equipped to adapt in a changing world, to navigate uncertainty with reason, and to resist the seductive simplicity of ideology. They learn that life is complex, that people are not reducible to categories, and that progress requires dialogue, patience, and courage. This kind of education produces adults who can stand on their own, who can build and create, who can preserve what is valuable and reform what is corrupt. If we allow indoctrination to replace education, we do more than fail children, we betray them. We deny them the tools to think freely, to evaluate ideas critically, and to contribute meaningfully to the society they will inherit. But if we hold fast to the idea that education is the pursuit of truth, then we honor children by preparing them not for the battles of today, but for the challenges of tomorrow, equipping them with the clarity and strength to face life as thinking, responsible individuals. Ideology simplifies the world dangerously, leading to resentment and despair. The appeal of ideology lies in its promise of clarity, its ability to divide the chaos of life into neat categories, into good and evil, oppressor and oppressed, hero and villain. For a mind struggling with the vastness of existence, that simplicity can feel like a relief. It offers a narrative where all questions have an answer, where all conflicts have a side, where all complexities are stripped away. But this seductive clarity comes at a cost, because reality does not bend itself so neatly into those categories. Life is not reducible to a single axis of interpretation, and when people are trained to see it that way, the inevitable clash between ideology and reality creates disillusionment and bitterness. Children, the danger is especially acute. A child taught to see the world exclusively through the lens of ideology inherits a distorted map of reality. That map may work in a classroom debate or in an activist circle, but it fails when confronted with the real struggles of life, when dealing with work, with relationships, with the complexity of human motivation. People are not simply oppressors or oppressed, saints or demons. They are complicated mixtures of virtue and vice, strength and weakness, courage and fear. Teaching a child to ignore that complexity trains them to misunderstand not only others but themselves. They will see themselves as victims when they fail, or as villains when they succeed, and in both cases resentment festers. Resentment grows because ideology always promises a scapegoat. It says, if only these people, this group, this system were removed, all would be well. That promise is intoxicating because it shifts responsibility outward. Instead of confronting one's own limitations, one's own need to grow and adapt, the blame is always external. And while that provides short-term relief, in the long run, it corrodes the soul. A person who always sees themselves as a victim loses the capacity to act meaningfully in the world. A person who always sees others as enemies loses the ability to build trust, to cooperate, or to love. When entire generations are trained in this outlook, society fractures. Communities dissolve into camps, dialogue collapses into shouting, and despair takes root where hope might have flourished. The antidote to this despair is not more ideology, but the recognition that life is inherently complex, that suffering is part of existence, and that responsibility is the path through chaos. A child who learns this lesson understands that while injustice is real, their life is not reducible to it. They can take action, however small, to improve their own condition and the condition of those around them. They can see others as individuals rather than stereotypes, as fellow travelers struggling with their own burdens rather than as abstract enemies. That recognition restores dignity because it replaces resentment with purpose, and it replaces despair with the possibility of growth. The world is still difficult, but it is no longer a trap. It is a challenge that can be met with strength, courage, and integrity. Children need competence, discipline, and responsibility to thrive. These are not optional traits reserved for a select few but essential foundations upon which a meaningful life is built. Competence is the ability to do something well, to master a skill or a field of knowledge. Discipline is the structure and self-control required to pursue that mastery consistently, even when it is difficult or tedious. Responsibility is the willingness to shoulder the burdens of life, to recognize that one's actions matter, and to act in a way that contributes rather than destroys. Without these three, a child may grow into adulthood biologically, but psychologically and morally they will remain adrift, unprepared for the challenges of existence. Competence provides a sense of agency. When a child learns to read fluently, to solve a problem, to create something of value, they realize that the world responds to their efforts. They see that through effort and learning, they can turn chaos into order. This recognition breeds confidence and resilience because they begin to understand that while the world is difficult, it is not impossible. They do not have to remain helpless in the face of challenges. They can acquire skills, adapt, and improve. Without competence, however, a child will always feel at the mercy of circumstances, dependent on others to solve their problems, and increasingly resentful of their own weakness. Discipline is the scaffolding that makes competence possible. No skill is mastered in a single day, and no lasting achievement comes without effort sustained over time. Discipline teaches children that immediate gratification is not the path to long-term success. By practicing patience, delaying rewards, and persisting even when tasks feel tedious, they cultivate the habits that lead to mastery. A disciplined child learns that life is not always fun, but it is meaningful when effort is applied toward worthwhile goals. They begin to internalize that success is not a matter of luck, but of consistent striving. Without discipline, even the most talented child squanders potential because talent unguided by structure often decays into wasted opportunity. Responsibility ties both competence and discipline into something larger than the self. It is one thing to learn skills and to practice them consistently. It is another to understand that those skills and habits should be used in service of something greater: family, community, work, or society itself. Responsibility anchors a child in the recognition that their actions matter, that they have a role to play in the lives of others. This knowledge imbues life with meaning because it frames struggles not as pointless suffering, but as purposeful burdens that can be carried with dignity. A responsible child becomes an adult who can be trusted, who contributes rather than drains, who builds rather than tears down. Without responsibility, however, competence becomes arrogance and discipline becomes rigidity, because both lack the moral framework that gives them direction. When children are raised with competence, discipline, and responsibility, they do more than survive. They flourish. They grow into adults who can confront the inevitable challenges of life with strength, who can adapt to change without collapsing, and who can build meaningful relationships and communities. These traits provide them with the capacity not only to endure suffering, but to transform it into growth, ensuring that their lives are guided not by resentment or despair, but by purpose and hope. Parents and educators must resist projecting their battles onto the young. This temptation is subtle but powerful, because every adult carries with them a history of wounds, frustrations, and ideological commitments. It is easy to look at a child and see an opportunity to correct the mistakes of one's own life, to settle unresolved conflicts through the next generation, or to ensure that one's beliefs are carried forward unchanged. Yet when this happens, the child ceases to be viewed as an autonomous being, and instead becomes a vessel, a stage upon which the dramas of adults are replayed. This strips them of their individuality and burdens them with struggles that are not theirs to bear. Parents often want their children to succeed in ways they themselves could not, and while this desire is natural, it can quickly transform into projection. A parent who always longed for prestige may demand their child pursue a profession that brings status, regardless of the child's genuine talents or interests. An educator who feels passionately about a political cause may frame every lesson through that lens, shaping students not to think critically, but to adopt the same conclusions. These actions may feel like guidance, but they cross into coercion because they deny the child the freedom to discover who they are. They transform education into inheritance, where ideas and identities are imposed rather than explored. Children are highly sensitive to this pressure, even when it is unspoken. They can feel when expectations weigh on them, when they are being asked not simply to learn, but to carry the unresolved burdens of their parents or teachers. Instead of growing in confidence, they grow in anxiety, fearing that failure does not simply mean their own disappointment, but the disappointment of those who project onto them. They may conform outwardly, achieving the goals laid out for them, but inside they carry resentment or emptiness because the path they walk is not authentically theirs. The true role of parents and educators is not to manufacture replicas of themselves, but to act as guides and guardians. Guidance means offering children tools, knowledge, and examples, while allowing them the space to apply these to their own lives. Guardianship means protecting them from dangers, including the danger of ideological possession or adult projection. To resist the temptation to project is to show respect for the individuality of the child, to recognize that they are not here to complete our unfinished business, but to write their own story. When adults project their struggles onto children, they believe they are preparing them for the world, but in reality, they are preparing them for battles that may not even be relevant by the time the child is grown. The world changes, challenges evolve, and new questions arise. What remains timeless is the child's need to cultivate their own capacity for thought, resilience, and responsibility. By stepping back from projection, parents and educators create the conditions for genuine growth. They show children that their role is not to inherit resentment or dogma, but to stand as individuals who can think, choose, and act with authenticity, raising children with character and resilience. Safeguards the future of civilization. Civilization is not some abstract structure that exists independently of the people within it. It is the fragile accumulation of values, institutions, and practices that depend entirely on the character of its citizens to survive. If the next generation grows up unable to withstand difficulty, unwilling to face responsibility, or uninterested in truth, then the foundations of society inevitably erode. The continuity of culture, the preservation of freedom, and the advancement of knowledge all rest on the shoulders of children who have been shaped into strong, responsible adults. Without that, progress unravels and chaos rises to take its place. Character begins in the small, everyday lessons that children absorb from their families, schools, and communities. It is taught when a child learns to tell the truth even when lying would be easier, when they are asked to keep promises even when they are inconvenient, and when they discover that courage does not mean the absence of fear but the willingness to act despite it. These lessons may seem trivial in isolation, but together they shape the moral backbone of a person. A child who learns honesty, courage, and loyalty becomes an adult who can be trusted, and trust is the glue that holds civilization together. Societies built on lies, corruption, and cowardice collapse, but societies built on character endure. Resilience is equally vital because life is saturated with suffering, failure, and unpredictability. Shielding children from all difficulty does not prepare them for life, it cripples them. To cultivate resilience means to allow children to face challenges appropriate to their age, to struggle with problems and discover their own strength in overcoming them. When a child learns that they can fall and rise again, that they can endure setbacks and still move forward, they acquire a sense of confidence that no ideology or entitlement can provide. Resilience is what transforms pain into growth rather than despair, what turns obstacles into stepping stones rather than walls. Without resilience, every difficulty becomes a crisis and every disappointment a justification for bitterness. With resilience, challenges become opportunities to strengthen character and deepen meaning. Together, character and resilience form the bedrock of civilization. A society filled with individuals who cannot tell the truth, who cannot endure hardship, and who cannot take responsibility will decay into chaos. Laws and institutions cannot compensate for the absence of strong individuals, because laws are only as effective as the people who uphold them. Civilization depends not on abstract ideals, but on the concrete reality of children raised to embody those ideals. When we invest in building character and resilience in the young, we are investing in the stability and prosperity of the future. When we neglect it, we gamble everything on the hope that civilization can endure without its foundations, a hope that history has shown again and again to be false. In this way, the raising of children is not a private matter alone, but a collective responsibility, because in every child lies the fate of the generations to come. If we choose to see children as individuals, nurture their competence, discipline, and responsibility, and protect them from the weight of ideology, we give them the chance to grow into strong, resilient adults. And in doing so, we do more than raise a generation, we safeguard the very future of our civilization.